Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover Podcast presented by the Field of 68 and J Apparel. I'm Christian Sykes, your host, joined as always by Charles Branch and Joey Blackwell. How you guys doing today?
Good. Glad we're recording on Wednesday and not Monday like we were originally scheduled to do. It was going to be a pod where I think we didn't really have a lot to talk about with two wins last week, but now after that performance in Oxford, I think we have a little bit more to talk about.
Yeah, really. I mean, I think really surprising last night, just performance from Alabama. And that's not to discredit Ole Miss. I came away very impressed with just how they played and what they did. A lot of things that I did not expect from them. And I think it was a perfect of a lot of things that Alabama did wrong and a lot of things that Ole Miss did right. And it was a perfect storm kind of last night. But it's just one game, and we've talked about it. You know, you can't let one game go into your next game in this SEC conference.
Yeah.
It does feel like a huge lost opportunity um, that we just gave away, which was kind of the theme of last night too, with the 21 turnovers and just giving the ball away. But there's still a ton to play in front of you. Surprisingly enough, you know, as shocking as our loss was last night, the shocking loss of the night in the SEC was Missouri going into Florida and beating them. And games like this are gonna happen, and games like this happen to national championship teams. They've happened to championship teams over the past several years. So it's a great opportunity for, you know, win or lose on Saturday going into Kentucky, what's going to be a tough place to play. It's a great opportunity for guys to show some maturity, show some toughness, and bring back that effort that we've been accustomed to seeing for most of this year.
Last night was a perfect example of missing Latrell Wrightsell.
Yeah.
Last year, Alabama, whenever they got into these situations similar to what they did last night, Latrell Wrightsell would hit a big time three. It seemed every single time Alabama needed a three, Latrell hit one. And last night, in the first half and most of the second half, it felt like Alabama just needed one run and the game was over. Ole Miss's offense wasn't super effective. Alabama did a really good job defensively against them. They just needed to see shots go in, and not having Latrell Wrightsell last night, I think ultimately was the undoing of Alabama. One on a leadership point of view, and then two just on a pure shooting. The shooting is a major concern for Alabama at this point. We've been kind of talking about it all season, where guys need to get in the groove. Eventually, it'll come around. Well, it's January 15th, and Alabama is still probably shooting 31% from three as a team. And last night was no different. They shot 25% from three. And weren't effective in the interior. And Alabama can't be a one-dimensional offense because then teams are just going to pack the paint and dare Alabama to shoot. And the only two people that seem consistent enough shooting the three are Latrell Wrights, or not Latrell Wrights, so Mark Sears and Aiden Holloway at this point in time. So um, for moving forward for Alabama, if they have the same type of defensive intensity that they had last night, that's a good sign for Alabama because it was a very good defensive effort. The issue is that offensively you can't have 21 turnovers. The fact that Alabama kept that a 10-point game with the turnover differential of 14, and I think that they shot 22 more shots than Alabama, um, shows you the type of talent level that Alabama has to be able to keep games close. Ultimately, you just can't have 21 turnovers. And if you are going to have 21 turnovers, then you need to turn the other team over, and they didn't. Um,
You either got to turn them over or you've got to decisively win the rebounding margin. And we only won the rebounding margin by two last night. I was going back through just the play-by-play box score. Our last turnover last night came at the 5:30 mark in the second half when we were trailing 59-51. And so you just think about, you know, you cut those turnovers to 14. and a lot of those being live ball turnovers. So you cut their 14 steals in half to 7. That's 7 crucial possessions that if you score on half of them, it's a tie game, and even possibly you're winning the game with some of the 3-point shooting or the 3-point shots that we typically take. And I think for me, that was what was so frustrating about the start of the game is because I told you guys, I really think we'll win this game if we reduce our live ball turnovers and we win the rebounding margin. And we didn't do either one of those. We came out by the first media timeout, we had already had 5 turnovers, had the ball coming out of the media timeout, and immediately turned it over again. And even through all that, we went to the first media timeout up 4-2. You think about if we take care of the ball and have good possessions and at least get shots up at the rim, whether they go in on the first shot or the expectation of maybe setting a tone and getting some offensive rebounds, you'd be going in the first media timeout up 8-2, 10-2, completely different ball game, especially with the crowd that we had last night as well. So it was not a good start. It was Nate Oates said in his press conference talking about how we just weren't ready to go. Um, and it was that. It was, the defensive chant late in the first half when we had the ball coming from the PA system. It was just a weird night, and things just didn't really align well for us. And again, I give a lot of credit to Ole Miss because they watching them in person, you could see how quick and how athletic that team is. They stayed in front of us all night. They jumped the passing lanes, and we were either not prepared for it, we weren't focused on it, we didn't listen to the game plan, listen to the coaching staff, or the players just never adapted to it. And of course, that's how you get to 21 turnovers over 35, 36 minutes of play at that point.
Yeah, I remember Burner agreeing with me on the podcast last night about how it honestly was a game where it didn't seem like we won the rebounding game. We out rebounded them 39-37, and it's just because Ole Miss was able to do so much when they were able to get the ball. With Alabama, it just seemed like we weren't effective. Another key stat from last night is the fact that we're, on paper, the best 2-point shooting team in the country. And they had more points in the paint than we did last night, 36-30. So when you have nights like that, it's obviously not going to go well. But Charles, you kind of took a point that I was going to say as far as, this team has struggled to start not just games, but start halves in general. And, talking about those other 5 or 6 turnovers before the first, media timeout, if you can just, turning over, having a turnover at the beginning of the game, that's understandable. You're still getting used to the pace. You're getting used to the other team. That's perfectly fine. But if you can reduce that number to 1 or 2, it really just sets a precedent for the entire game. And the problem is that when you turn over the ball that much, you're setting the precedent. And that I think this team just really needs to get their head wrapped around it. If you can start a half, this the first 5 minutes. You don't have to make the whole thing. We'd prefer for you to play a great 20 minutes. But if you can start a half in the first 5 minutes and really establish yourselves, things kind of just start to fall quite often. They fall where you want them to go, or they go in the direction you want them to go. So this team just really needs to come out. They need to establish themselves more. It was really, from a fan standpoint, it was disappointing to see just how physical Ole Miss was playing compared to how we were, particularly when we were trying to protect the paint. We've done a pretty solid job of doing that all year, but last night they really out physicaled us. I think the results speak for themselves. So, we have a really tough road game coming up this Saturday. And I obviously wish we didn't have an L in the conference record right now, but I do think that a lot of the things that went wrong have been things that have really plagued us all season, but to a lesser extent. And so it happening right now at the beginning of conference play is pretty good timing that everything kind of came to a head last night. So now it all comes down to, how does this team respond to this? Do they see these mistakes and do they work on them, or do they tuck their tail between their legs and we go to Kentucky and get boat raced? I think will this team respond? I'm not quite sure, but I know for a fact they are very capable of doing it. So hopefully we'll be singing a very different tune on Monday. But right now, the sting is still there. It hurts, but I think the positive is that there's a lot for this team to learn from Tuesday night.
But and I also think that what also negatively impacted us last night too. I think Darian Reed could have been huge last night, just as a guy that you could hit on the wing and he could back a guy down and get to the block and get a good look at two. Just with the size mismatches that we had last night that we really weren't able to take advantage of. I think about Cliff constantly pinning guys down low and couldn't throw it up for a lob or just get it over the top to let him have a good look. But also about Cliff, he plays 13 minutes and forgetting that in the second half against A&M, he did have the ankle injury. He looked a little labored getting up and down the floor in the first half. So there may be more on the injury side with him right now than we of course are privy to. But need to get him healthy, need to get Darian Reed healthy. I think those two guys being healthy last night would have really aided us in one, having other guys that you can put in when guys are turning the ball over. But I think that physicality that we maybe needed at times, if they're at full strength, they could have maybe matched some of that Ole Miss was giving us that for whatever reason we weren't able to match with the guys on the floor last night.
And also, Christian, you were talking about Latrell Wrightsell earlier and how, last night would have been a game where we really could have used him. Like that was a game where you missed him. I did think, I feel like Chris Youngblood really tried to fill that role. It didn't work out like we would have liked to have seen, but I really think that he stepped up in the game. And it's hard to talk positively about a player after a game like last night's game. But, 2 for 8, from beyond the arc, that's disappointing. But he was getting a lot of really good looks. He was really trying to really spark those runs. He had those back-to-back threes, early in the first half, which was what sparked Alabama to really kind of, it's really what gave them the lead at halftime, really, even though it was so early. That's what created that margin. I have confidence that Youngblood can do a solid job at kind of replacing Latrell on the roster for what we have right now. It's just going to take those shots falling. If 3 more of those shots fall, this is only a 1-point game. You play those last few minutes very differently. So I do want to throw some kudos to Youngblood because I really think that he really tried to step up in that absence, and that was a game where that caliber of play was needed. And so I just want to throw some kudos his way because even though it didn't work out, he was giving a lot more effort on the offensive end than some other players that were out there.
And he played 35 minutes last night, which is definitely the most that he's played in an Alabama uniform. What I would like to see more from Chris is maybe some, you don't want to turn down an open three. I get that. But he is such a good shooter and he's built that he can get to the rim as well. And I know has shot free throws well in his career. And he was a guy that at South Florida averaged, I think, 3 or 4 free throws a game. I'd like to see him get to the free throw line more. In addition to where we see Mark Sears get to the line a lot. Obviously, Grant Nelson gets to the line a lot. Grant's struggling a little bit at the free throw line. But based off of what we saw last year, again, we know he's capable of knocking those free throws down. LeBaron Philon last night. I don't think anybody would have thought LeBaron Philon would have gone 0 of 8 and being 0 of 5, from twos at the rim last night. But again, those games happen, and he's a freshman. Those games happen for freshmen all the time. But to add Chris Youngblood in that mix as a guy that can not only be a guy that can knock down threes, but get to the rim and get to the free throw line, I think would help this offense. And hopefully too help other 3-point shooters where he can be one of those guys that can get to the paint and kick back out to guys that are wide open potentially.
This might be a reactionary question, but do you think that Aiden Holloway needs to be inserted in the starting lineup?
I think when you have a guy that is successful in his role and Aiden's a guy who's been successful coming off the bench. And LeBaron has been very successful starting. That I don't think it's a need to have to switch those two guys right now. Where maybe 2 years ago, talking about Jaden Bradley and JQ, there was a point with Bradley that he really was struggling and he was getting pulled pretty early on for JQ to be inserted into the game, and then eventually took his starting lineup spot. I don't think that's the same situation right now. I think Aiden brings a good change of pace. Um, if I really had to make a lineup change, as well as Jaron Stevenson has been playing, as far as just doing the dirty work, and being aggressive and getting to the rim and stuff like that, I think he's more successful coming off the bench. I wouldn't mind seeing a Chris Youngblood or a Darian Reed in that spot, and maybe more so a Chris Youngblood who has shot the ball at time. He's done it in his career, and it seems like he's, even though he went 2 of 8 last night, starting to heat up a little bit from three because he went 3 of 6 against A&M. Giving you another good 3-point shooter to start the games, and then Jaron be the guy to spell Grant or to spell Cliff. I was a little surprised with how he played in his 3 minutes that Aiden Sherrill didn't get more time. But just talking about starting lineups, where in the past we've talked about, does Jaron need to come out of the starting lineup because he hasn't played well? He's earned his starting spot, but I think just as far as matchups and lineups, and I think looking at last year, I think Jaron does a better job coming off the bench than having to start, in my opinion.
And I'll go further back even than Charles just did with Javon Quinley and another Jaden and Jaden Shackelford. You had two very capable guards on the team, but only one can start and only one can be on the bench, And both of those guys, I think, filled their roles really well. In this instance, I think, Sears is obviously established team leadership, right? I mean, it's really hard to justify somebody that's been there, that's been with this team for a while now. Seems like he's been there for the entire Oates era, but then that's just my head. It seems I can't imagine Alabama basketball with Nate Oates without Mark Sears at this point. But having a guy like him in that established leadership role, it's much more than just stats on a sheet. I think if you were to pull, Sears and put him on the bench and put, somebody like Aiden Sherrill, or not Aiden Sherrill, excuse me, Aiden Holloway on there, I just don't know what kind of message that sends to the team. I think that doesn't send confidence. I don't think that would send confidence to the roster. So that being said, I think Aiden does have all the ingredients he needs to be a Javon Quinterly. That fifth man. That sixth man. Off the bench. I think he really does have those skills, but I don't think that. I wouldn't consider your take reactionary, but I do think that it's not necessarily. It's going to take a lot more for me to take that side, I think. What about you, Christian? You're the one that posed this question.
Oh, the move would be for LeBaron Philon for Aiden Holloway, and I would never benchmark Sears, just so that anyone listening, so we're clear. The reason why I posed the question is the issue Alabama is having right now is, like you said, the starts are slow and we're not shooting well. And LeBaron Philon, while he's been good defensively and while he attacks the rim well, he can't shoot. He's like 20-something% from three. And I maybe it's you have a situation where you put Mark and Aiden out there and you have two really good ball handlers that you maybe don't start the same way that you would start versus Ole Miss with 5 turnovers in the first 4 minutes, right? Because Aiden's played in the SEC. Aiden's played this schedule. And I think right now for LeBaron Philon, I think he's kind of hitting that freshman wall because this is the first time he's played this many games in his career. This is the first time that he's played this type of level of physicality, right? And I'm not saying LeBaron hasn't played well because he has, but maybe it's a situation where you bench LeBaron for a little bit, let Aiden get a little bit more comfortable. I also another good point that you brought up, Charles, was that maybe Jaren's better coming off the bench. Well, maybe Chris Youngblood's better starting. That the guy has started his entire career and now he's coming off the bench. Maybe he's a guy that while Jaren, and I love what Jaren did last night. I know he wasn't super effective offensively, but he was extremely effective defensively. Um, Maybe you put Chris Youngblood in the starting lineup and see if that helps him get going and get into a rhythm rather than, I mean, if he's going to play 35 minutes, might as well play 35 minutes and start the game, in my opinion. I mean, you're talking about the co-ACC player of the or AAC player of the year last year, and you're bringing him off the bench. I know he's coming back from injury, but I don't know. I think that for the game on Saturday, Kentucky's a bad defense or a bad rebounding team. I think they average like 30 something rebounds a game, and they're not very big as far as a team is concerned. I don't know how beneficial putting Jaren out there to start when you want to get a guy like Chris Youngblood going, and then maybe you put Aiden Holloway out there because he's earned his starting spot. Because I really do think like last night, Aiden Holloway was the best player on the court for Alabama. It's just my opinion. So, um, I I'm not upset with any of the players or any of the effort or anything like that. It's just I also think that the fatigue was a major factor in the game last night. I mean, Mark Sears late in the game was limping around and did like every time he touched the ball, he would just immediately pass it to someone because he was exhausted. Grant Nelson was exhausted. Cliff looked like he could barely run. Um, the one guy that didn't look, too exhausted was Chris Youngblood, surprisingly, playing 35 minutes. But um, I think playing on Tuesday night, it's good for Alabama because you get that extra day of rest going into Saturday, and it being 11 a.m. game for or at Kentucky, I think it's crucial to get the start right. And
I,
that's why I posed the Aiden Holloway question because I think that starting the game is crucial because we saw the Kentucky Florida game and Kentucky can score when it needs to. So
no, I think it's I imagine based off on how Coach Oates was in the press conference, there's a lot of things that are up for discussion right now. Um, you know, just not just starting lineups, obviously the offense and the best way to attack. Um, I still think that with this team, uh, that this is a team that needs to attack the rim first and maybe take more shots at the rim than looking to kick out for threes. I understood the game plan against A&M because of their size that you would want to get 43-point attempts up. Last night, I was, yeah, 23-point attempts I'm good with, and we weren't efficient at the rim. And I think that's part of our inefficiency was, again, credit to Ole Miss for being in front of us, but we also had some great sets coming out of timeouts that I imagine we could have pulled back out and gotten some really good looks at the rim too. I We're still going to shoot our 25, 33s. I know that's going to happen, but I do feel like I would like to see this team to continue to attack the rim first and shot at the rim first being the first priority instead of just getting to the paint and looking to kick out. And I think what that would do too is continues to get a guy like Cliff Amore involved on the offensive side. I don't think he needs to be involved on the offensive side for him to play good defense, but games where we've been really, really successful, he's had good offensive games too. And just the last thing on that, as far as good starts, we've not seen this Alabama team have a start to a game from three like we may be accustomed to at times with other Alabama teams where they start 4-4, 5-5, and basically throw a knockout punch in that first 5 or 10 minutes. So to your point of changing the lineup and maybe putting an Aiden Holloway in or a Chris Youngblood and get some more 3-point shooters, I agree with that too. Because we don't with the current lineup, while those guys can shoot threes, it just has not materialized yet.
Well, and you're thinking of the starting lineup, right? LeBaron Filan's like 25% three-point shooter. Jaren Stevenson's around a 20% three-point shooter. Grant Nelson's a 26% three-point shooter. Cliff's not going to shoot threes. That's four.
Cliff should shoot threes though. He's got
But
watching him in warmups, and again, it's not a quick release like Youngblood, but both him and Aiden have pretty good form, and he was knocking some down in warmups. Again, I understand that's probably not the shot that you want, and you want him around the rim because you want him to get putbacks and stuff like that. But there's a little bit more there if he had to play out behind the perimeter, whether it's setting a screen and then rolling for a quick three or stuff like that. You're right. Yeah, I don't think we'll see it, but there's more potential there than maybe Charles Bediako throwing up a three or something like that back in the day.
didn't
I
Chuck
would
shoot a
love.
three?
Yes.
I would love to live in a world where Cliff gets a fast break three. somebody driving at each. That would
Well,
be a beautiful world.
I think he averaged like one or two three-point attempts a game last season.
Mm,
So it's not like he doesn't shoot threes. He's just, I mean, maybe they don't want him to. I mean, there's been times where I've seen him wide open. I'm like, shoot it. Like,
yeah, might as
might as
well.
well. Yeah.
That's how Grant figured out he could hit a three when people wouldn't guard him at the line.
I'm a little surprised we have not. I know we've attempted it, and it would probably been more unsuccessful than we've been successful this year. And teams have, they saw the film on what we used to do with Bediako and Nick Pringle and probably know how to better defend that pick and roll. But I'm surprised we have not found more opportunities in a pick and roll situation to get a lob for Cliff at the rim this year.
Well, in order to do that, you have to not turn the ball over.
That is very true.
Yeah. I think that's their
value the
number one.
basketball.
Yeah, I think that's their number one priority right now is just not turn the ball over.
I'd also like to let our listeners know that Bama did have 2 wins last week. We've only talked about the Ole Miss game so far, but
Oh
did
yeah, I
we
forgot
want
we
to
did
talk about
record.
the games? Yeah.
Well,
I do want to end that on a positive note, in that the South Carolina Bama did look really good at South Carolina. That was one of their better performances of the season. That rough, we all had to endure the 3 hours of pain for that Texas A&M game, but at least that ended in a win. So, Christian, I have a question for you, both you and Charles. What are y'all's thoughts? Starting if you had been told, heading into the Oklahoma game, okay, Bama's going to start the SEC, start conference play 3-1. What would you have taken that, or would you have liked to have seen a little bit better?
look, I think you stole one on Saturday versus Texas A&M. I kind of predicted that we would lose that game, which I think we talked about this last night on the space. Like, if you told any Alabama fan that you'd start 3-1, don't tell a fan what game you lost or whatever. I think that they would be happy with that, right? I think the issue with Alabama fans is you start 3-0 and you look at the Ole Miss game and you're like, okay, well, Alabama, and maybe that's what the players did too. Maybe they looked at the Ole Miss game and like, oh, we're going to win that game. It's Ole Miss, right? And I think the issue is that you feel like you gave one up, just like you stole one. Um, so if you would have told me that we start 3-1, I'd be happy with it. I wouldn't be upset.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think the narrative of what I felt on the Texas A&M game, of where we shot less than 40% from the field, we shot less than 70% from the free throw line. We had 15 turnovers, we gave up 23 offensive rebounds, and we gave up 48 free throw attempts, and then you still win by 6. Like we played the game that A&M wanted to play, and you still go into a tougher environment and win a top 10 battle there. But then you watch what happened last night, and we've seen it, how we've played to our opponent's level, our opponent's ability. And we played right into how Ole Miss wanted us to play by turning the ball over, and them doing a good job of not turning the ball over, and them, being physical and keeping the rebounding margin really, really close. Like I still don't know if this team has really found its identity of how it really wants to beat teams. Um, we put it on Oklahoma, we put it on South Carolina, but I still don't know, what do you say about this Alabama team as far as this is what they're going to do to you? It's not shooting threes successfully right now. Um, we talk about getting to the rim, but I don't think it's enough to the point where, yeah, that's this Alabama team is they are really good at the rim, really hard to defend there, and then it's paired with really, really good defense. The defense is improving, but it's still not where it should be, I believe. And so, just what is if you're trying to, put one or a few words on this Alabama team, what is their identity right now?
And I think, losing the Ole Miss game was tough because, like you said, Christian, if you told me we'd gone 3-1, I don't think the Ole Miss game would have been the one that I'd point to. That would be the loss. But the good thing about this, especially if Alabama can get things together and if they can win this Saturday, which I know we're about to talk about Kentucky in a second, that's a loss that will be in a month completely forgotten because it's sandwiched in between two huge road conference wins. So I'd honestly, if I was told you'll beat A&M and you'll beat Kentucky, and I could pick which other game was the loss, I would have picked last night because it's also a ranked loss on top of that. But you have two really tough road environments. People watched that game from last Saturday with the officiating and just how that game got out of hand on both sides. And then Alabama fights through that, loses a game to Ole Miss at home, but then rebounds and comes back, not rebounds, but bounces back and beats Kentucky. It's kind of a perfect recipe if Bama can get the win this weekend. If they can't, then you got to start worrying about a slide coming up. But I think really it's positioned perfectly to where anybody that's pulling their hair out and anybody that's upset, it's way too early to be thinking that way. This loss can still be an opportunity.
No, I think anybody that's really upset right now is still, got PTSD from Alabama basketball in the 2010s, where games like this, you were on the bubble. So losing games like last night, you're not in the NCAA tournament. And I think that's where a lot of that frustration probably comes from. And you talked about it a little bit last night as far as what's going on across the state. We haven't played very well at home, really, except in a couple games. So I think a lot of that maybe they built into the frustration too of PTSD from the 2010s, but also maybe some other things that are going around that are things we cannot control. And we don't need to worry about things that we cannot control. We need to worry about this team and just what the product is on the court night in and night out.
So let's go ahead and start previewing Kentucky. I don't want to spend too long harping on the game last night. So Charles, what do you got for us?
It was very strange going through Kentucky, which under Calipari had all these great freshmen. And now you look at who's leading this team, and it's a junior who's going to play his 78th college basketball game, a fifth-year senior who's playing his 147th basketball game, a fifth-year senior who's playing his 114th college basketball game, another fifth-year senior has 131st college basketball game, and two more fifth-year seniors that are going to be playing their 135th and 123rd basketball game. Like, you want to talk about Team AARP, that might actually be Kentucky this year. Look, it's Kentucky's been a big story, obviously, with Calipari going to Arkansas. One of their beloved sons, Mark Pope, coming back to Kentucky. The whole fanfare of how he was announced, coming off the bus with the national championship trophy, having the big win against Duke to start the year. And they put together a really good Some really good wins. The Florida win being one of them to kick off conference play. The win last night against Texas A&M. I think to simplify this, as far as what we need to do, we got to guard the three. In the games that Kentucky has lost this year, which is Clemson, Ohio State, and Georgia. At Clemson, they were 7 of 27. At Ohio State, they were 4 of 22. And against Georgia, they were 6 of 25 from the three-point line. In the game against Gonzaga, that they did win out there in overtime by 1 point, they were 7 of 25. So a close game. They didn't shoot that well from the three. Were able to pull out that game. But you look at their wins against Florida, 14 of 29, and against Mississippi State last Saturday, they were 16 of 32. I mean, in my opinion, it's got to be drilled into guys' heads and maybe even bring out the game plan that Florida used against us last year and that Kentucky used against us last year too, of you do not leave shooters. We play one-on-one defense if we need to on guys that are driving to the rim, but you do not leave somebody alone outside the three-point line. In addition to guarding the three-point line, I think it's pretty obvious. Take care of the basketball and just play Alabama basketball. Get out and run. Don't be too quick, but get out and run. Be physical. Rebound the basketball and lock down at the three-point line. And I think if we do that, we're set up for a really nice Saturday morning, early Saturday afternoon, getting to watch those highlights throughout the rest of the college basketball day.
Yeah, I think for Alabama, like you said, guarding the three-point line is critical for the success. I also think that for Alabama, if you're going to have to shoot and you're going to have to shoot well, like that, this is a game you have to shoot well. I'm talking like 37, 38% from deep on like 30 attempts. Like you have to put pressure on Kentucky's defense and on their offense to force them into the bad shots that you want to take, which means you have to hit shots. And you can't have the turnovers, which you had 15 versus A&M, you had 21 versus Ole Miss. You need to have like 10 turnovers. You can't give away possessions, and you have to rebound. Kentucky is a bad rebounding team. You have to get your second chance points. You have to get your defensive rebounds and limit them to one possession. Because much like Alabama, if you give them 3 or 4 chances to hit a three, they're going to hit a three one of the 3 or 4 times. And so you have to limit them to one possession offense or one attempt offense. And then you have to get your offensive rebounds if you're not going to hit your shots.
And there's one way there's a cure-all for all of those issues that you just said. And that cure-all is to not rush and not force things, which playing in a rough environment or not, like Lexington, it's going to be crazy. The crowd's going to be nuts, especially when it's going to be a top 10 matchup. Well, a top 10 matchup between these two teams. It's going to be loud. It's going to be crazy. The players can't let that get to them. We were talking before the podcast about how when Bama trails this year in particular, they're really bad about trying to force things, trying to make things happen, trying to play too fast. And that ultimately leads to making bad shots, not getting good look, and trying to shoot when you don't have a good look, trying to fit the ball in the eye of a needle and turning it over, sloppy turnovers, bad passes. I'm not saying that, slowing things down in general and practicing calm is going to solve everything, but it's a good step in the right direction when it comes to fixing a lot of these issues. That's what we saw in the loss against Ole Miss when Bama got down after, in the second half. It was pretty much over from there on out, because you had a bunch of guys out there trying to make things happen that they just couldn't make on that given night. So there's a lot of issues that Bama needs to correct heading into Saturday, but I think if you start there, that'll give you a good jump heading into a game in a very, very tough Lexington environment.
Absolutely. I'm confident in the team. I think I said this in maybe I didn't say it in the space, but I think I said it in our group or whatever. I think Alabama wins on Saturday. Nate Oates teams following double-digit losses since 2020. So since after the first season, where he's 14-2 and following a double-digit loss. 10-0 the last two seasons. Um, I think that the loss is ultimately a good thing for Alabama, like we kind of said. I think it'll refocus the team. It'll make sure that they're not getting too big as far as their heads and their confidence is concerned, and make sure that they do the things the way that they need to be done to win games. Because I will say this: if you lose the Kentucky game, and not saying lose it close, like not saying it's like, but if you lose by 15, 20 points, then I think you got an issue on your hands as far as this Alabama team is concerned about not being able to focus and following this Kentucky game, the like next 8 games are winnable games for Alabama. I think this game is not a must-win game, but it's a tone setter for the remaining 8 games until you get to the difficult schedule for Alabama in the SEC. So I'm confident that the guys will be ready to go. They'll have a good week of practice, and that they'll ultimately, I think they do win in Kentucky. So
Yeah, I'm not so much concerned about win-loss. Like I obviously want us to win the game, but knowing what we have in front of us, like you said, as far as just this will should be the softer part of our SEC schedule. I want to see an Alabama team that's locked in and focused and doing the right things, like we thought we had saw at Texas A&M in the game against Oklahoma for a majority of the South Carolina game, for what had started to kind of, come together against South Dakota State and Kent State and Creighton and North Carolina. Like I agree, the rest should help. Where I feel like this team should really be judged is, can you shake off Tuesday night? Can you come in focused, and can you go in and play hard for 40 minutes? Because even in these games that we've, had some big wins, there's still been that inconsistency, those lulls at times where we turn the ball over too much. We don't have good possessions on offense. We get lost on defense and allow the team to make a little bit of a run. Like, can we just lock in for 40 minutes and play the way we feel like this team is capable to play? Play the way that a lot of people thought this team was going to be in the preseason, or prove that you're a team that should be considered one of the best in the country.
And this game is, I mean, nobody's understating how important this game is, but one of the biggest factors of this game is that it's kind of something that you touched on, Christian. If you win this game, you start the season, or start the conference play 4-1, which is obviously good. But if you do that, you're staring 7-1 right in the face. And if you start 7-1, you only have one loss with 10 SEC games left in the schedule. That is a huge, I won't say advantage, but you have a leg up. It puts you on footing with the top teams in the conference. It puts you on the same level as Auburn or Tennessee as far as shots, or maybe Florida, to win the conference. So this game is much more important than just beating Kentucky, because everybody wants to beat Kentucky, especially in Rupp Arena. But when you combine that with this is a pivotal moment, I think, in the schedule. I think this game on Saturday, by the end of the regular season, we can look back on this game this Saturday as this was the moment that Bama was able to right their ship. Not right the ship. I don't think the ship's turned over, but they were able to course correct and able to really guide themselves through the rest of this SEC schedule with this game. Or this was the moment where things really started to go downhill. So I think that how Alabama handles this weekend will be a huge factor heading into the rest of this season.
absolutely. Well, did I miss anything
I will mention real quick, outside of the men's basketball team. I think this is coming out. What is I?
tomorrow or
Yeah,
Thursday?
tomorrow, Thursday.
Yeah,
Thursday.
So anybody that's listening to this early Thursday afternoon, um, the South Carolina women's team is coming to Tuscaloosa and playing our girls team, Thursday night. I think it's 6 o'clock. We had a huge win at Ole Miss, a big bounce back game coming off of losing at Texas. I think we're currently 19th in the country right now. I know they would love a huge crowd and a lot of support. So I just want to continue to talk about the women's team because they are continuing to do things that have not been done in several decades. I think they're pretty fun to watch. They shoot a lot of threes too. So if you can make it to a great game, be there, be loud. I know they would enjoy your support. They're going to be a team that's going to be in the NCAA tournament, which still to me is just remarkable that the Alabama women's program is back in the NCAA tournament after how bad it looked when I was in school down there in the early 2010s.
Yeah, and go. We were supposed to. So I know we kind of teased this. We were supposed to have Sarah Ashley Barker on here, but she's recovering from her injury, and hopefully we'll have her at a later date. We wanted to have her on to talk about the game coming up, but obviously, like I said, she's got her injury recovery that she's doing. So go to the game if you're able to. I know it's tough back to back or ev 2 games in 3 days for some Alabama fans, but go if you're able to go. But all right, I think we're good. Good to sign off, and we'll have a post game space following the game on Saturday. We'll talk again soon and roll tide.